back on. So,
okay, so how do we look at a representative community of practice? Specifically in this context, it's disability. However, for me, this question isn't just around disability. Within a democracy, there are many times where committees are called together or communities of practice are put together to be representative of. They could be representative of a group of residents within a local council situation. They could be representative of the migrants within a community, and so there are multiple. There are different migrant groups. There are the demographic of residents and so forth within a community have different income streams, professional stream, non-professional, blah blah blah. So I guess a representative to me is about that whoever they're representing feel there is sufficient diversity within that particular committee to reflect whatever group they're representing. So if you said to me, a disability group, I actually feel in order for it to be representative that you would have in some instances it could be defined, one of the defining things could be the issue. And so for me, if it's a transport issue, for instance, there may be a sector or a group of people within the disability community who are greatly affected by that issue, and therefore you would expect to see a broad representation of those people that may be impacted within that kind of committee, if that is if it was an issue-based thing. A representative group would be groups that have, I would say, a level of knowledge of the issue or the profession or the activity. So I think having capacity to understand what's at stake. Age range, representative types of disability in the context of what the issue is about. Is it at a local level? Is it at a state or a national level? Or is it an issue-based thing around something like transport, for instance, and therefore there would be some disability groups that are more greatly impacted than others? But it's not just a disability issue at all, because many groups within a democracy have need to be representative of different voices and different issues, and it's quite dynamic that could change. And if it's a political situation, then it's not effective to have, if it's a disability issue, to have everyone involved having to have things. And I also think that there needs to be consideration given to participation in the sense of making assumptions about people having to meet in a certain place or come together in a certain way should also be on the table, because just meeting in a room or meeting at a venue is not satisfactory in order to be able to participate effectively.
I suppose you also want to steer away from getting people in committees and in positions just because they have a disability, and not because of the skills, the engagement.
I think, and that's it. There needs to be debate and an understanding of the issue, and there needs to be preparedness to contribute and be part of the decision-making process. And that there is that you're expected to perform to standards, or there's rules of engagement. And above and beyond that, the group needs to be able to contribute informed decision-making processes to whatever it is. And I think that's really important. And for me, there has to be the capacity for independent thought and be able to put a case.
What does a representative group look like?
I don't know. I think that question is really interesting in terms of the fact that it's quite loaded. I think that getting an advisory committee that is representative of everyone isn't actually possible. I think that there's a lot of different factors at play. There's the factors of who is organising it, the politics that sit behind that organisation and how they interact with their communities or the disability community. And then on top of that, there's also interest in the topic of whatever they're advising of. And 9 times out of 10, people choose to invest their time in an advisory committee because it is something that they feel passionate about. And people that feel passionate about something aren't necessarily reaching the demographic, because I think one of the biggest issues facing advisory groups is a lot of the time the voices that they want to hear are the voices that aren't engaged in the process of advisory committees or the process of organisations. They tend to be either not interested, or they're isolated from those processes, or they're disenfranchised from them. There's a number of different reasons. I guess I look for people that have natural connections, that are well, I guess, developed in their social networks in community and have the power to mobilise those quite quickly and fairly represent. I try to steer away from people that are beating a drum too loud, although a lot of the times, you can't really steer away from them. So it's about making sure that the advisory committee is geared to take them on the journey as well.
And do you think that's a challenge for any committee looking for a representative group, or is it,
The thing is that it's always going to be, I know it sounds lame, but it's always going to be a journey. And you have to take people with you, and you have to respect the fact that when you're in an advisory position, people are going to have different opinions and different tactics of doing things, and you can't force them to see the world your way. So it's I guess it's a facilitation process. It's a learning process, and you learn as well. Like there's a lot of, like, there's things that the councils have implemented that I didn't necessarily think would work, or I wouldn't have advised, and they have worked quite well. Like, they've been quite successful. But there's other things where I've advised, and I will continue advising and see how I go with it.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep. And so you mentioned loaded question at the beginning. Can you elaborate a bit more about why it's loaded?
It's loaded because once you start unpacking an advisory committee, you're actually unpacking politics and power and how those people relate to each other, how those people relate to the wider community, their perception of how that is and the reality of how that is. And on top of that, usually advisory committees are put together around an issue that is also loaded. So there's politics behind that and there's power structures behind that. And as you start to delve into those, things get more complicated, and and I guess that's what I mean by it being quite a loaded issue. Be aware of the fact that there's always going to be issues with an advisory committee, and you're never going to get a good spread across the table in the seats, and plan for that and say, like, okay, so these are my advisory committees, but how else do I engage with the rest of community and involve them? And unfortunately, like, there's no silver bullet, and I think that a lot of different groups are looking for a silver bullet, and I think that that's what they think advisory committees are going to be. Get them all there, they're going to do the work for you, you won't have to go out and do any of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, actually getting good, solid consultation and advice is really laborious.
Yep. So it can be a great method to get to some of the core issues, or get a sense of what's going on in the community, but it shouldn't be where that process stops.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
exactly. Yeah, and I don't think that advising should stop at advisory committees or steering committees or reference groups or whatever. I think that you have that group, and they're great to go to and maybe like use as a resource. But I think in terms of a project, if you're actually looking for decent involvement or information from people, yeah, take it to your advisory committee, get their advice, but then take it wider. Like, make sure that you have a communication strategy that sits behind what you do, and that you're strategically communicating your project and how it operates and the decisions that are being made, and make sure that even though you have an advisory committee, there's still space for community input in an informal sense for other people to interact with it. And I think that that's probably a much more comprehensive way of looking at your advisory committees and kind of tackling the issue of how do you get a representative advisory committee, because I just don't believe that it actually works that way. So you need to, I guess, plan for it.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Kirra.
You're welcome.